Welcome back to the home front. I'm your host, Reed Galen. Today, I'm joined by Tara Palmeri. She is one of the most feared and fearless political reporters in national politics. She has 15 years experience covering national politics and foreign affairs. She was formerly a White House correspondent for ABC News, where she covered the first Trump administration. She was chief national correspondent for Politico during the Biden administration, and she has been a political analyst for CNBC, CBS, and CNN. She started a career as a columnist for the Washington Examiner and then went on to report for the New York Post. She was a foreign correspondent for Politico Europe, where she covered international affairs, including Brexit. She writes a weekly newsletter called The Red Letter and hosts the Ringer's political podcast, Somebody's Gotta Win. She's also hosted two acclaimed podcasts on Jeffrey Epstein, Broken, Jeffrey Epstein, and Power, The Maxwells. Tara, welcome to the show.
Thanks. And now I have a YouTube channel at Tara Palmeri for everyone. That's at TaraPalmeri. Follow me everywhere, guys.
Follow Tara everywhere and you will never be lost. Okay. So Tara, so you've been at this a while. I want to run back the tape a little bit. How'd you decide to get into journalism and how'd you decide to get into political journalism?
It's funny that you asked that, Reed, because where I grew up in a very working class neighborhood in New Jersey, I'm the first person in my family to go to college. My dad's an electrician. My mom came to this country from Soviet Poland. We didn't know journalists. We really didn't spend a lot of time with people who graduated from college. So I saw them on TV. Mm-hmm. I watched the war in Bosnia on CNN very closely and intently and pretended as a kid to be a war correspondent with my karaoke machine, recording from the war. I watched Oprah and I would sit people on the couch and watch her. I had tons of journals as a child and I would spy on the neighbors and take notes. And they called me the Jersey Journal because I had all the gossip. So I think implicitly—
Gossip Girl before it was cool.
Exactly. I was implicitly always a journalist in everything I did and mimicked it. But I didn't really know that it could be a job or something that someone like me could ever do. So, when I was in high school, I learned about the muckrakers and what they did in terms of progress and change in the turn of the century. And I thought that was really fascinating. I'm talking about Nellie Bly, Upton Sinclair. And they used yellow journalism at that time to call out the robber barons, to expose the meatpacking industry and what they were actually putting in the sausages and trying to create built codes for buildings that were burning with young immigrant women in there.
Right. The triangle shirtwaist. Right.
Exactly. Never forget that building. But the point is it was wow, people could have power and hold, very powerful people to account with the pen, with journalism, with investigations, by going there. And, Joseph Pulitzer, the Pulitzer Prize, the biggest prize to be won in journalism, was created by a person who frankly valued yellow journalism. And so it made a lot of sense that I would pursue this because not that I believe in yellow journalism, but I believe in accountability journalism and I believe in being heard. So whatever way you're going to be heard, and I don't think news has to be boring to be news. Right. Which may explain why I ended up at the New York Post for 5 years of my career. But point is it really resonated with me. And then I decided I wanted to be a journalist. My parents came to college and they visited me my senior year when I told them I was going to graduate early to start working as a news assistant at CNN. And my dad said, Tara, journalists are miserable people. My mother said to me, you will be wearing H&M for the rest of your life and you will always be a waitress. And so, my parents were very much against this because, to have the ability to go to college to them meant you got a stable, normal job. You weren't some crazy journalist who chases cannibal cops around, which is essentially what I ended up doing for part of my career when I was at the New York Post at times. But point is, that was the drive. I'm a person who runs into fires. And so this was exactly for my personality.
It's fascinating. I didn't know that about your parents. Do you think that coming from that perspective, of being in a working class family, of your dad, having a trade. I don't want to call it a blue collar job, a trade, and your mom coming from behind the Iron Curtain. Do you think that has impacted the prism by which you report? Because I feel like, and I say this with all due respect to so many of your colleagues, it's like small Northeastern elite liberal university and then off to Medill at Northwestern or off to Columbia. And I feel like that again, I think that imparts a perspective that often doesn't sort of get the world as it is, but rather a very sort of cloistered Acela corridor.
Or as they wish it was.
Right.
But yes, I agree. I felt throughout my entire career that I was surrounded by people who came from a higher class than me. I often felt like I didn't, for a long time, like I didn't speak like they did. I still don't, because frankly, like English wasn't a first language for people that I grew up with. And so we spoke in our own way. We said things like, "Oh, you're giving me agita." We had phrases that we spoke in like a combination of like Yiddish,
Yeah.
Italian, like everything. I grew up around a lot of like first generation Americans. And so we were working class kids. Like I worked at a deli, at a pizzeria. Like this is what we did. And so we cared about things like how much money we had. We talked about like, are you broke or are you not broke? We didn't really have the like capacity to think about like higher intellectual things because it was kind of like Survivor.
Right.
I think sometimes like that's where people who get into journalism and politics like forget about the story that really matters the most. And that's not to say that like I'm like on the front lines talking about economics every single day, but I just think sometimes I have like an instinct towards like when people in DC who have been so cloistered away from that world, when they really frankly mess up, and they seem to forget what the heartbeat of this country is. And so I try to stay close to that. I love my parents. They keep me normal-ish. They don't understand, they still don't understand me, but they're now starting to understand that this is who I am. But yeah, it's a weird thing. I remember in college, like I would sometimes just provoke people in my classes because it was so liberal that I would like I didn't necessarily agree with what I was saying, but I kind of enjoyed I understood with Trump with the trolling the lib stuff where I would just say it because I enjoyed to see how outraged they were that I would have a contradictory view. And so now like in my career I don't do that. I don't really care for it because I see it happening all the time. I'm an
Right.
observer of that theater.
Right.
But when I was in college, there was no one there like offering the other perspective up. So I was just like, you know what? I'm going to do it because this is going to make the conversation more interesting.
Right.
And, now we're in a really weird time. It's way more heated than it was in 2008 when I graduated from college. But
Yeah.
it's like, it's still something that I try to achieve a balance as much as I can in all of my journalism. I really am not ideologically driven. I'm really scoop driven because I don't want, if I had a major story read and like it blew up the Trump administration, right? I wouldn't want them to be like, she's a partisan hack. She hates Trump. Look at all the things she's said about Trump in the past.
Right.
Same thing if I have a huge story about the Biden administration. I don't want them to be like, she's a Republican hack, and then be able to show all the, like, it's so important to that since I am an investigative journalist, that people will say like she's above board and take the words I am writing seriously rather than seeing them as having some sort of agenda.
So a couple of things. One, just to go back to the part you just made, I thought it was always fascinating. I saw somebody write this about the show Veep, that they asked people like, is it a Republican administration or a Democratic administration? And if you were a Republican, you thought Selena Meyer was a Democrat, and if you were a Democrat, you thought Selena Meyer was a Republican, right? That was how brilliant it was written.
I didn't know that. That's funny.
But you said one quick thing, because a lot of my family was in New Jersey. My grandmother lived at Exit 8A, Edison Township. I'm not sure if that's near where you're from.
Yep, it is.
But the older members, my family came from, it was either Ukraine or Lithuania. I don't know. It was all mixed up in the same place that you're probably near where your mom is from. But when the older people didn't want the younger people to understand, they switched to Yiddish, right?
Yes.
Like they had their conversations. When my
Well, they
grandmother
speak in Polish,
Yeah, when my grandmother threatened me for not doing what she told me to do, she said I was going to get a Zetz in the kishkis or a Zetz in the tsaner, which means she was either going to punch me in the stomach or slap me in the head, right? So like I very much understand that sort of appeal, and also there was that sort of ethos, which is like, no, you get up every day and you work your ass off, right? Like you get up every day, and if you're going to do it, you do it the right way, and I think that is something that I think comes through, because I don't want to call it earthy. I think that's too much, but there's a level of like realness to the work you do, because again, it's not that you don't care what people think. It's like, no, I'm going to write it the way I see it, because we're all multitudes. We all are products of our backgrounds, our upbringings, our experiences. And I think to your point, like, it's weird that you came from this background, and in the position you're in now, you're sort of still an outlier, right? Because so many of your colleagues have come up in a very different place. And look, I see the same thing. I was just at this thing earlier this week at this dinner in New York City, where by far I promise you, I was the only person who went to a state school. I guarantee it. I was the only person.
Yeah, one of those Masters of the Universe meetings.
Right. I was the only person without a graduate degree. I was the only non-lawyer at the table, right? So it was just one of those things where, but there I am. I made myself
sounds like a
middle.
Snooze, right?
Yeah, I was, but I made myself a middle, just like Larry David, right? And I got myself into it. And again, you have to have no fear and some things like that. All right, so let's go on. So you talked about like where we are. So you start with the New York Post, which obviously is a tabloid. Did you ever get to write the headlines on the front?
We never got a chance to write the headlines. And in fact, submitting the headline would be a surefire chance that headline would not be chosen, because they have their own headline artists. They're really creators, and they were in a separate place. They're a bunch of weirdos, loved them to bits, but the total weirdos, they kept them away from us, and they did the headlines, and they decided it. So,
and that was their job.
Yes, that was their job. They are artists. Like in the same way that you could be a cartoonist for the newspaper, you're the headline writer, because it's the most important part of the Post. Packaging. Right. I mean, they know everything about packaging. So I unfortunately, like, I would sometimes be like during, Wienergate, which was like amazing for us, Anthony Weiner and his whole debacle. I would be like, the rise and fall of Weiner, premature evacuation. Like, there were so many things, but I couldn't, if I even suggested it in the headline, it would 1,000% not be chosen.
Do you remember during Wienergate when Andrew Breitbart showed up and crashed Weiner's press conference?
I don't.
That? I think it was at the New York. It was at the New York Hilton. You might have been just out of college, but I remember I happened to be sitting in the little office.
This was before the dick pics, obviously, because Andrew died when we were like in 2010, right?
Yeah. So this was before that. You might have still been in college, but like Weiner had done something, and Breitbart showed up and crashed the whole thing. Right. And I still remember that moment, because I'm sure if you go back and look at my old tweets from that time, I was making the same jokes you were. Right. And like Breitbart was telling us something, and enough of us weren't listening. Right now, Steve Bannon, obviously the guy who took over for him, understood it. But did you have any expectation that when you first got out of school and you went to work for the Post and you went to work for the Examiner, that we would end up in this place? Were there any signal flares you saw back then in your early career that said maybe something's not, there's something in the offing?
Yeah, you know what? I think the rise of the Tea Party was happening at the same time that I was at the New York Post and at the Washington Examiner. Now, I want to note that it's not like I gravitated towards conservative media. My first job out of college actually was a news assistant at CNN. It's just really hard to get a job that's not in conservative media if you don't have the family connections, so that you're an assistant to one of the big columnists at the New York Times, the New Yorker. It's really hard to penetrate news that's like kind of more mainstream media, liberal media, without having the connections through your family. And so I didn't seek that out necessarily. But yeah, no, I think we all saw it, right? Like Obama wins, Republicans are completely in tatters, the young guns are lost, Eric Cantor goes down, the Tea Party rises up, and who comes out of it? It's Donald Trump eventually. So yeah, I think that actually what the Democrats are going through right now is essentially what the Republicans went through after Obama won.
Right.
Because that was a shellacking, as they like to say in politics. And this is a time when leaders rise from the ashes, and they tend to be from the base that finds them. So I could see Democrats getting primaried from the left in this next election. And I could see this kind of AOC revival maybe.
So a couple of things. One is that what you said about, where you started. I think about Tim Alberta, right? I think maybe Tim started at the National Review or one of those.
That makes sense.
So, and Tina Wynn, your former colleague at Puck, right? I mean, not only did she start on the right, she was a product of the right. And she's now
Claremont.
Yeah, she's now at The Verge, I think. Is that where she just ended up?
Yeah. She's not. She still covers the right because she just gets it.
Yeah, she gets it. But she said that at Vanity Fair when I interviewed her for her book a couple of years ago. Is they all came to her to say you have to explain these people to us, right? Explain because of course it's Vanity Fair,
crazy.
Right? So, but you talked about the Tea Party and so I want to go to the Tea Party because you see your latest piece is about we've seen I will give him no quarter. We've seen the collapse or the surrender of Chuck Schumer in this latest continuing resolution fight. And your latest piece is about sort of what the short, medium, and long-term effects of that are. But I want to stick with the Republicans in the U.S. House for a second, because
Yeah.
If you had told me that there would ever be something that came out of Thomas Massey's mouth, this guy from Kentucky who like loads his family up with guns and puts them in front of the Christmas tree on his family's card.
God.
If I would ever agree with anything he said, I don't think I would agree with you. But here's a guy who like they're threatening to primary him every time. And he's out there and he's got his cards and he's like, well, they say best case scenario, this deal's only going to explode the budget by, or the deficit by this much. Come on. And he goes through these things. And I'm like, he's the guy. He's the budget hawk. And so,
yeah. Trump was never a budget hawk. That's why I'm like, why is he?
Yeah, because he's always spent other people's money. So that's never been his issue. But why is it that like, why is the Thomas Massey of the world, or let me ask the question a different way. Is the Thomas Massey of the world someone who a lot of House Republicans feel the same way, but they're afraid to say it because they know what this stuff is maybe bad fiscal and financial policy, but they're too scared to get out of line?
Absolutely. If Donald Trump was not in the White House right now and you did not have Elon Musk and his hundreds of millions of dollars ready to pounce, you would see a fracturing of the Republican Party more so than you're seeing right now. You would see the House Freedom Caucus loud and proud and defying any sort of bill like the continuing resolution. I mean, this is a moment when people are afraid of Trump and they believe that his polling and the fact that he won the popular vote is a mandate and they have to follow it. But they're mostly terrified of Trump. And then Elon Musk, it's not even like it's a two-headed beast. It's not just Trump. You could have the entire X like turned on you, 220 million followers. That is a mighty force to go up against. God bless Tom Massey. I don't know.
Right. Well, and you know, he's fended off these primary challenges before. Again, when
because he says I'm more MAGA than they are. Bring it.
Right. And again, he's a House member, right? He's only got to deal with the people in his district in Kentucky. It's Kentucky, right? And I'm sure they all know him because he makes national news, from my perspective, as bad as often as good. But it was fascinating to see that. But in your latest piece, you talk about if Massey's the outlier for a guy like Speaker Mike Johnson in the Republican House, and I know it's a very narrow majority, why is it that they're so worried about what comes next? Why are they so worried? Are they worried about holding the House conference together, or is it that they're worried about that the Senate conference won't hold together, or that maybe Schumer will finally find a spine and make things harder for them come September? Why is, if there is so much fear in place based on Trump and Musk, why is Johnson having so much trouble keeping his conference together?
I mean, I think he actually did a pretty good job keeping the conference together to pass that continuing resolution because it was a Biden budget. I mean, it was the same one they passed in December.
Got it.
Which is remarkable that hasn't gotten as much airtime as it should, with a few exceptions. So I think the real moment when the rubber is going to hit the road for Republicans is going to be tax reform. And I've heard that from Republicans privately, that they're like, this is not a given. We had 13 defectors last time. And by tax reform, I mean continuation of the tax cuts that they passed in 2017. You know, they had 13 defectors. They want to bring back state and local tax deductions. Trump has promised no tax on tips or overtime or Social Security. Like, these are expensive goodies to add on to it. It has to be budget neutral, has to be passed through reconciliation because they don't have the votes to pass it along a majority in the Senate. You know, this is not going to be easy when you only have 2 to 3 votes to lose. But before you even get there, you have to raise the debt ceiling in 2 months, which is like something that Republicans don't ever want to vote for, to raise the debt ceiling. They don't want that on their record. And so they tend to have to rely on Democrats for this. So like, this is an opportunity for Chuck Schumer to actually, you know, get a pound of flesh and like get something out of the Republicans. But like, Democrats are going to be expecting a lot from him. And the question is like, can he deliver what they think is enough? Like, they're going to be like, kill Doge. Republicans aren't going to go for that. Right. But at the same time, Chuck, like, the Republicans will be on their knees. You can't get to phase 2 or phase. First of all, only 4 times in history has the debt ceiling been raised along party lines with a reconciliation. Okay, that's not going to happen right now when you can only lose 2 to 3 votes. Okay, and it's just not going to happen. 4 times Trump's had to rely on Democrats in his first term to raise the debt ceiling. They need Democrats right now.
I know neither you nor I are like central bank economists, but why is it that
No.
like the debt ceiling thing keeps like, it's like we are the world's central bank, right? For better or worse. Why is this so often a fight when like we all know what's going to happen, and we all know that short of defaulting on stuff, don't worry about it. I have dogs barking all the time. Don't worry, I had a guy yesterday, his dog barked half the episode. Why is it that like this continues to be a fight? I mean, to your point, like the Republicans, they used to make this argument: Democrats are tax and spend liberals, right? But Republicans are tax and don't spend conservatives, right? Like they don't really, or excuse me, don't tax and spend conservatives, which is they don't really want to cut anything if they don't have to. Some of them really do, but
I mean,
not
some would
enough.
like to go after entitlements, but like,
Right.
That's political suicide, frankly.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and it looks like we can get into this. There's some administrative ways they're making Social Security more difficult, which seems to, again, be tap dancing in a minefield. But
right,
why
by not having people there to answer the phone, it's crazy.
Or being even able to answer, even to make a phone call. But
Yeah.
my question for you is more broadly political: is why do both parties do this to themselves on this debt ceiling every 2 years? Why don't they just say we're going to raise the debt ceiling $5 trillion or something, so that it's to do what politicians
because nobody
love to
wants to be the ones that voted for the debt to go up. It's like
But do you think that, I don't want to say this, but like if how many voters, let's get back to people who actually make decisions on these things. How many voters are going to vote on the debt? I mean, yeah, there's some conservative Republicans.
Some people do. I mean, I hear my mom talking about it a lot, and she's a swing voter. Friends of mine, they talk about it a lot. It's definitely permeated the conversation. People are concerned that like our country's in default, and like they're concerned about that. They think there could be an economic collapse.
Right.
So I don't think it's like, I think Trump actually has been pretty successful in getting people to Republicans to be less of fiscal hawks, because they've been hammering that away since you were in the White House, Reed.
Right. I know.
When
I had hair.
Exactly, when the deficit was going to take this government down, that stuck with people. And it makes sense. You can't keep running things on your credit card.
Well, again, that's the whole thing, is that you can, if you're the world's reserve currency and you print all the money that other people need too, right? And that like oil sales, right, are denominated in the dollar. Like there's so much of this that is this wrapped up into the things that frankly we helped create in a world that was completely on its back post World War II. But now, as we saw, I mean, I think we'd love to get your sense of this from a historical perspective, right? That world to me sort of ended a few Fridays ago in the Oval Office when Trump was like screaming at Vladimir Zelensky and threw him out, right? Like to me, that was sort of a point of demarcation, saying, okay, there was all the stuff before then, which you could make an argument it was even before then, but now there's all the stuff that comes. And so let me ask a broader question, which is, why is it, do you think, that so many people, and like the people I was having dinner with the other night, have a hard time understanding that the world we are in is a world that none of us know, that there is so much topsy-turviness, if that's a word. There's so much in chaos. There's so much in transition. Why is it so hard for people to understand that the world that we all came up with, at least the world I came up with, is gone, not to return, and what's going to come next, none of us can really predict?
This has been happening for a while. Like, this evolution, this didn't happen 2 weeks ago. Anti-globalism has been happening since, honestly, I think since Obama got elected and the Tea Party started to rise, and it happened across the globe. I was in the UK. I was covering Brexit based in Brussels for Politico. There was a lot of anti-globalist sentiment at the time with the shifting of manufacturing to China. People stopped trusting the Western world leaders. Marine Le Pen rises. She's on the far right in France. She still has a considerable amount of political heft. She keeps running, and one day she may very well win. The AfD is rising in Germany. It's like basically Nazi adjacent.
Right.
This is a real reaction to working class people feeling like they are losing their jobs in the wave of industrialization. Sure, it exploded in a reality TV style way in the Oval Office, but for all those suits that came from Ivy League schools, they didn't feel it. But a lot of other people did. and they are not surprised. In fact, they feel a little bit of vindication when they see that happen because they feel like they're being heard.
Well, and I mean, that's so this brings me to something that you mentioned a few minutes ago, which was Democrats getting primaried from the left, a la AOC, a la Bernie. And this is where I'm not a Democrat. I'm not going to be a Democrat. I've fought alongside them for the last 5 years and fought against them for many years longer than that. I don't think the argument on the left is between moderates and progressives. I think that's a bullshit argument. I think the argument is between those who would like to bring the Democratic Party back closer to voters and to working class Americans, and those a la Chuck Schumer who are still very much of the neoliberal mindset like you were just describing, right? That this is because I think that if you took the average establishment Democrat in Washington, D.C., right, or even the establishment donor, Democratic donor, their economics are probably only degrees apart from a Republican, right?
Yeah.
But if you go to places like where you grew up and folks like with whom you grew up, or you go to all the places that I went this fall, right, that world has left them behind, to your point, right? If that factory shut down 20 or 30 years ago and the union guys left with them, those men and women and their families were left like, what do we do now? And what happens? Republicans swoop in, a la the Tea Party, even before Trump, and say, you're getting screwed. You're angry. They did this to you. If you go back, I've said this before, the listeners have heard it. If you go back and watch Ross Perot's 1992 infomercial, he called it all. He literally called every bit of it. He said, this is going to wreck jobs. This is going to wreck infrastructure. This is going to do all this bad stuff. And no one listened. Bush 41 was for it. Clinton was for it. Bush was for it. Obama was for it. And Trump wasn't. Now, I don't know that he necessarily has an ideological belief one way or the other, right? I don't think Biden was really for it. I don't think Biden's a neoliberal in the cast of the other people. And I think that's why some establishment Democrats don't like him either. But I think you're right, is that part of it is like, wait. We had a solid middle class. We had a thriving middle class. Folks like your parents could send a kid to college for the first time. And now,
actually, my parents would constantly complain that my dad would complain that when he grew up, there was a solid middle class. When I was growing up, that he did not. And they struggled to send me to school. I went on a scholarship.
Yeah.
I mean, I could have went to like an Ivy League school, but I didn't because I couldn't get a scholarship there.
Yeah.
And like, so my parents had a lot of angst about where they stood in the world. I mean, not so much my mother. I think she was just happy to be there. Whereas my dad felt because he was promised more.
Soviet communism wasn't a great
it's exactly. But like, I think for my father, he was just like, he believed that he was promised more. He used to say that to me. He's like, when I grew up, a guy could pump gas and have a family of 4. He's like, can't do that anymore. You know what I mean? And so I think he was sold on that. I think if my dad's not a first generation Italian. Our family came here like 100 years ago from Italy, maybe more. And so I think if he knew that, maybe he would have went to college. Mm-hmm. But he was promised that he could have a trade worker, either work for a union, start his own company, and he would be okay. He didn't think he was going to have to struggle as much as he did in his life.
Right. Well, and
being replaced by, frankly, he had a lot of resentment towards migrants coming from the South who were taking their jobs, essentially.
Right. Yeah, which again, not new. None of this is new, right? I'm sure.
No, and I was like, Dad, like Italians were called WAPs when they came out without papers when they came into this country,
Right. Irish need not apply, right? I promise you that when my family came over from, again, wherever it was in Eastern Europe in 1905, by 1907, they were like, close Ellis Island.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
I'm sure they were. Like, none of this is new. And you could make, actually, I'll ask
That's
you
a good
a question.
point.
I could make an argument that the reason why the Democrats were on the wrong side of the immigration issue was because so many of the people that they counted on, i.e. the Latino community, felt the same way, which is what had they done? In a weird way, Tara, they had assimilated. They were Americans, right? Like, no, we came here. Maybe we came here the right way. If we came here the right way, why should somebody else not come here the right way? I'm not saying I necessarily agree or disagree with the policy aspects of it, but you could make an argument that they were doing the same thing that our ancestors did.
You mean the migrants coming from the South?
Yeah.
No, but they were told that there were jobs there and they came through legally.
Oh, okay.
You know what I mean? If you go, my family, at least I know from my dad that my Sicilian grandfather came here at 12 alone on a ship, and his name is on Ellis Island, actually, on the wall there. And I always look at it actually when I go running, because I don't live so far away from, I live in Brooklyn, so I can see it at the Statue of Liberty. And I'm always like, damn, he'd be really proud of me now. Do you know what I mean? He built bridges. Do you know what I mean? Like he lived in, and like they were fearless and they were young, and they have the same grit and they have the same interest in just working like a lot of these migrants that come from the South. The problem is that they're not coming legally. This country doesn't want them here legally because we have a broken immigration system, even though we need them. I don't say want them. We need them.
Right.
And if you ask anyone who works in agriculture, you ask in the restaurants that my mom said you're going to work in forever, everyone in the back was very few of them were American citizens. We need them for our workforce. We haven't figured it out yet. But like to someone like my father, that allows them to, competition because they don't have to, the labor is cheaper.
Right.
So someone who works in that industry and labor, like they're threatened by that. But as they always have throughout time.
But yeah, to your point, but that's also another thing is like it's a broken system in which people are being paid subpar wages because they have no other option, right? Like they're going to get screwed on how much they get paid. Because they have to take whatever they can get. And I don't say whatever, but often, and then, like also it's like, now ICE could hunt them down, right? Could chase them down.
Yeah.
But to your point too, like we have a massive generational problem. We have a massive birth rate problem. We have all these other things. And, we have a massive trades problem. Right. And this is one of those things about like what you were talking about with Democrats getting primaried from the left. I mean, last fall I was in New York doing an event and people like, well, this and that. I'm like, listen, you guys, like you're all for college debt forgiveness, right? Yes. Okay. But 68% of the country doesn't go to college. So what does that tell them? Right.
And there's also a lot of resentment from people like me who paid their college loans and would be like, what about me? Okay. Like that took me some time to finish paying my college loans.
But this was the question I asked them, Tara, which was rather than saying we should forgive student debt, whatever, like what about breaking the system that allowed it in the first place?
Exactly. Like, why can a university charge $60,000 a year? That's insanity.
And you know what they said?
It is actually out of control, the price of higher education.
You know what they said? Well, we'd have to take on the banks and the universities. I said two great opponents. Who wouldn't want that fight, right? Not these people, right? But again, I don't
understand how a university can go from $40,000 when I was there to $60,000 now. It's insanity. Like what do they need all that money for? They managed to get
right.
Like,
well, I mean, you saw like Harvard's got some ungodly amount of, endowment, and they're now going to say, okay, if your family makes under $200,000 or whatever, you can come for free.
I would have went to college for free then.
Right. I'm not sure why everybody isn't going for free. Right.
I could have went to Harvard probably.
I know. I could
Harvard.
Harvard. I could not have. I know that. Thank God for state schools.
I was a little nerd in high school. So
good for you though. Right.
I was trying to get out of Jersey,
And yet here you are still across the river, but the river is a big divide. So tell us a little bit more about the first 60 days of the Trump administration, what you have seen that you're not surprised by, what you're seeing that does surprise you.
I'm surprised that Elon Musk is still around. Not the sense that there would have been a breakup or to the extent that he's around. I didn't think he was going to find that much interest in federal, I didn't think he was going to find that much interest in being a part of the administration. I thought like the Doge cuts were a lot of talk, especially when Vivek got kicked out. I was just like he'll like putz around for a little bit and then he'll be out. I didn't expect him to be like static cling to the president and basically running the whole country.
Right.
I think a lot of Trump's aides didn't expect that either. And so the fire and fury of all of the executive orders, it's overwhelming, not surprising. The revenge, I mean, he was being tested. He didn't enact revenge on Hillary after he won. So I thought maybe there's a chance he's benevolent, but that was just a thought that flashed in my head. But frankly, it's just Elon and why he's still there.
Well, you wrote a recent piece about Elon and how the West Wing staff is just, they can't stand him, and he treats Susie Wiles, who I know Trump's chief of staff like a secretary. And it's
Yeah,
funny
like
because
a fucking secretary.
right. And so it's really fascinating. I mean, just to give you a sense of how much the world has changed in just over a decade, the first time I met Susie in a professional capacity, she was running John Huntsman's presidential campaign. Right. Think about that. John Huntsman, a middle of the road,
Yeah,
milk
she's
toast
always been an
Venmo.
establishment Republican.
Right. And her husband, Lanny, who I've known for many years, right, was always sort of the
Ex-husband.
I didn't know that. Well,
Yeah,
Lanny,
they broke up.
oh, I'm sorry to hear that. You know, Lanny was the advanced man extraordinaire. He was the raconteur. Anywhere you went, he could tell you a story. And so to see that and to see that, like, you know, do you think Susie's like opening her eyes now? Like, I thought I could navigate this. I thought I had it figured out. And now like the balance beam is being tipped over on me.
No, I think she has known all along that this was going to be a crazy train. I don't think she thought she's going to have a two-headed president. That's
right.
Obviously a two-headed uncontrollable president.
Yeah.
But she knew what she was signing up for. As Mark Caputo says, she does her MAGA serenity prayer, accept the things you cannot change and know the difference. So I think Susie knew exactly what she was doing, and she's a survivor. And as much as she was like annoyed with Elon Musk's freelancing and complained about it, he's not going anywhere.
No.
And Trump actually reined him back a little bit and said, you know, scalpel, not sledgehammer. Well, but yeah, everyone's annoyed.
The other part too, and I don't know if you wrote about this or somebody wrote about it, about this blow up of Musk and Rubio in the office and like, or in the cabinet meeting, and everybody's like, oh my God. But like, I don't necessarily think that Trump dislikes that stuff. I think he dislikes the leaks, but I don't think he dislikes people fighting with each other, because
no, he loves people fighting, especially over him.
Right.
But yes, he doesn't. Yeah, of course. By the way, Elon starts the meeting by saying, I've created billion-dollar companies. What have you done? Like the cabinet's a bunch of slouches, like Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, or Lutnick, or Linda McMahon with WWE, a bunch of losers compared to him. He's just so dismissive. He's just a dick. Like, there's no other way to put it.
Right. And
as someone said, he treats the cabinet secretaries like they're messenger boys.
Right. Because, you know, again, it's, you have $1 billion, I have 400 billion, right?
Yeah, like, I mean, he's the richest man in the world by many times.
Right, it's not close.
And all of the details, by the way, on this are in my latest newsletter, The Red Letter. I hope you'll subscribe on Substack. Yes. Consider becoming a paid subscriber, because I am independent and it's expensive to do reporting. But yeah, like what I found out was they're not even polling Elon Musk, which is crazy, which suggests to me that they're afraid of him, because he's obviously a huge political liability. But yeah, I talked to Trump's pollster and he was like, no, we haven't polled him ever. And that was weird. And also they had to play cleanup on that whole Larry Kudlow interview where
Social Security.
He said, where he said, we need to cut the Social Security from entitlements. Yeah. He garbled, you know, the waste part and fraud. And it just sounded like we need to cut Social Security.
Right.
And it was a huge mess. White House had to send out a memo bolding it, because he's not very articulate.
No. I mean, he's a goon, right? He's a nerd, right? They're all nerds. All these guys.
Yeah. I think he's intelligent, but he's just...
there's no question about that. It's not a matter of his intelligence. It's like all of them, right? Like
it's
Elon and his hair plugs, Bezos and his HGH, right? Like they were all nerds who didn't get the girl, and now they all like, I'm the richest guy in the world. Right.
Yeah. I didn't know that he had hair plugs. That was interesting.
Yeah. If you go back and look at the when he was at like PayPal or whatever, you see his hair, like it's fallen out. Yeah. And he's clearly had some significant work done, which again, you know,
apparently Trump had his scalp done too. So everyone's doing it, Reed.
I mean, we're at this point, Tara, we are months, if we're lucky, years away from the Hunger Games, right? Like it's just like they all look like the Hunger Games. They all act like the Hunger Games. Fiction is going to come true. Okay.
They were pretty good on the campaign trail, though. They kept it together, but they kept it tight. But you can't keep a White House tight forever. It's very top heavy, too, with all these deputies underneath Susie Wiles.
Yeah. Well, again, and it's the White House, right? And I mean, what I would say is this. I was talking to some folks, I had coffee with some folks this morning, and they were like, well, Trump isn't smart. He's sort of a dumbass. I said, I don't know that that's exactly right. He's not classically intelligent, but he is reptilian. And what I've seen from this,
that's a good way of putting it,
next iteration, Tara, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this, is that he is a learning lizard, right? He is not making some of the same sort of mistakes that he did before. He's not he's not taking the bait on as much. It doesn't seem to me from like the people
Or maybe
who
we're all just paying so much more attention to Elon that it's Trump's getting a pass. I don't know.
yeah.
He's got good instincts.
Yeah, and this is one thing that drives my Democratic friends crazy is like he puts on a show, guys. You got to learn how to put on a show, right?
Right.
They're
Totally.
like, yeah, this is like going around talking
Their
about.
programming sucks. The Democratic programming is boring. And that's another problem. They haven't figured out the influencer game yet. They haven't figured out. They're way behind Republicans on that.
Okay. I know you got to run, but before you go, tell us about the influencer that Democrats hired because this was ridiculous. Please tell us the scoop you had on this.
Which wait, the
You
one
said
on
that
Brian Tyler Cohen?
No. They brought in some female influencer whose whole shtick was like making fun of MAGA women makeup and like you have to be meaner.
Yeah. So this whole has been a thing for a while, like where Democrats are trying to like become more authentic. Men are I know it's like a Veep episode. I know. So they're trying to figure out how to talk like real people. And so, I mean, comedy is a good way to try to penetrate, but they're going like Wes Moore and Josh Shapiro are doing sports like chats, like podcasts, and they're trying to be like real or something. But this girl, Suzanne Lambert, she does MAGA makeup. She's like she calls herself the Regina George from Mean Girls of the Democratic Party. And so, yeah, they've asked her to, apparently she's not being paid. That's been clarified to me, but she's been consulting them on how to create better content, how to be meaner. Yeah.
Remember, you're probably you're too young to remember this, but there was when Al Gore was running for president in 1999 and 2000. I can't remember the name of the woman who helped him, but like they came in to try and like zhuzh up his masculinity, right? And like put him in different clothes and different colors. And you remember, again, you probably remember this vaguely, but when we were on the 2004 Bush campaign and Kerry's out there in like perfectly tailored hunting outfits. And, we used the windsurfing thing a million times over.
He's a dandy is what you're trying to say.
He was a dandy.
He's a little too coiffed.
Yeah. I mean, they're all dandies and like, there's nothing wrong with that, but you got to own it. Right.
Yeah.
It's like,
well, they have a lot of these guys out there. Like I just interviewed him. I'm blanking on his name. He was
compelling then.
Oh my God. Is that terrible? I just said that. Jason Crow. When was it Jason Crow? Yeah. He's a Democrat. I had him on the show. He's a veteran. He came on. He was really talking about how Republicans, he's from Aurora, Colorado, and he walked out of the State of the Union when Trump started saying Venezuelan gangs had overrun Aurora, Colorado. But yeah, he was saying the same thing, that they need to work on it. But he's trying to show like it's a tough guy. Democrats have tough guys. That's why they put Alyssa Slotkin out there, CIA agent, to do the rebuttal.
Yeah, but that was not a tough guy response or a tough gal response, right? That was
she was good though. I thought she had a very like muscular response.
It was fine. I mean, those things.
Yeah, it was boring. I mean, listen, no one's raving about it. No one's mocking her either. So I don't know.
Yeah, look, it's not Katie Britt. It's not Rubio, right? So like, that's a win.
Right. But speaking of which,
right, you need wet your whistle. Okay, so but that's the thing though, is this is where like, if this is who you are, Democratic Party, be who you are.
If you're just boring, be boring.
Be boring, but be the best boring you can be. Right.
Like Larry David boring. I'm kidding.
Well, just like, I mean, but the thing is like Larry David, I assume is like 80% of what you see in his show is probably who he really is.
Yeah.
Right. He just doesn't.
That's why it works.
And that's why, because that's the thing is like Democrats are so worried about everything. I mean, I'm sure you've seen this. Oh God, I don't know. Well, what if
because they created a box for themselves with the cancel culture and they're afraid of breaking their own rules.
Right. Which is why I am glad that I am not a Republican anymore and I will never be a Democrat, but that's okay. All right. Tara, tell us more about the Red Letter. Tell us more about your YouTube. Tell us about the podcast. Tell us everything we need to know about you as the independent.
Yes, I'm liberated. Freedom. Following you, Reed. I've been a longtime investigative journalist, political journalist. this is my venture out into the new space. I have a newsletter called The Red Letter. You can find it at tarapalmeri.com. That's TARAPALMERI.com. I hope you'll subscribe. Consider becoming a paid subscriber because obviously I need to keep this going. And I have a YouTube channel at Tara Palmeri, and I post podcast videos on there. And I'm creating all sorts of content. I'm trying to bring my scoops to both platforms, which I believe you guys are. Like, I believe the audience is there. And that's where you want it. And I want to keep it real, authentic, unvarnished, just me to you. You're going to get all of my insider reporting. I really like specialize in reporting on what the highest levels of power in Washington are thinking and doing and saying. And so I want to bring that to you. And there's no one in between me and you anymore. It's just me. No
That's
editors, no filter, no bend from the. It's if you don't like it, leave a comment and complain. In fact, I'm fine with that. I like the dialogue. I want people to tell me what they want to know more about too.
Right.
So that's exciting too. It's just actually, I love the community that's being built and hearing from people about what they want to know about. Yeah, I don't love some of the hate on the comments section sometimes, but it's all part of the community.
I learned that a long time ago. Never read the
comments.
comments.
No. I want to, actually. I do, because I think it's giving me an idea of like, what do you want? What are you interested in? I think for so long, like media is so siloed and it exists on the East Coast and by a bunch of people who probably are the people you saw in New York this week, Ivy League, legacy news kind of brats, and like, not for me. So scrappy girl from Jersey, getting down to the story.
Palmeri Uncaged, guys.
That should be my name, but it's The Red Letter.
The Red Letter. No, and guys, it is absolutely worth the read and the subscription. I was going to say that, the one thing I will say to you in you come by what you were talking about your background and your upbringing and how you see the world is, you and I would talk during the campaign fairly regularly-ish, I'd say. And you were always sort of like, I was like, blah, blah, blah. And you're like, nah, I don't think so. And I'd be like, well, what about this? No. People don't care about that either. I'm like, okay. And it turned out you were right. Like 9 times out of 10, you were right. Like, I was full of shit. I've been doing this my whole life. Right. And you're like, no, that's not how this is going to go down. And so and look, I would say this too, is that to the point about independence, to the point about speaking your mind, and to the point about having a perspective, I don't get the sense, Tara, especially even in the journalism game, that people are necessarily offended by having a perspective. I think they're offended by the fact that, like, you're selling them, there's bullshit, right? That like they don't feel like you are being honest with them. I think there is something about having that, taking that editorial wall, and I use that as the editors.
Agree. I think you're right. I think it's okay to have a take, you know what I mean? And a perspective and a worldview. I think having, like, for someone like me who is doing investigative journalism, I think having a partisan mission is not right. Like, I might as well work in oppo research for a PAC.
Ugh,
do you know what I mean?
Awful. Yeah. Sounds horrible.
So that's not who I am either, because I've said this. I don't really think either party's great. Like,
no,
they neither have sold me. I don't vote when I cover elections. I kind of grew up in like a family where my dad was so MAGA before MAGA was MAGA, like Rush Limbaugh, Hannity and Combs. And my mom is like much more independent minded. And I've heard both sides, and I'm just kind of like, I don't know that I'm buying any of this. And I'm highly skeptical. I'm highly skeptical of people in power. I feel like power absolutely corrupts. And like, the only thing we can really do is check it.
Right. Listen, I'm with you. I'm 100%. I don't like massive amounts of power being held by anybody. I don't like any of that. And, one thing, and I promise I'll let you go, is that there was all this talk after Schumer of, oh, Democrats are at 27%. Okay. Yeah, that's terrible. Republicans are at 36. Like, that's not better, really, right? That still means that 2/3 of the country hate you.
We always, and the other funny thing is we always talk about like Trump's approval numbers and how they're high. They're high for him,
right?
But not for presidents in general. So
I'd be interested to see, though, is and this is for a future conversation of which I hope we'll have, is that I wonder if American presidential approval is like approaching like French presidential approval. Like, if a French president's at 28, they're like very, very popular, right? If only 80% of the country hates you, like, you're doing great.
Yeah, I'm sure. Because the French are very hard to please.
Yes.
I did. Yeah. But
you spent some
they
time
love
over there.
Marine Le Pen in the
Right.
heartland.
Right.
And when I say the heartland, I mean like some of the most beautiful places in
Provence.
France.
Right. Yeah.
Exactly.
d'Azur.
That's where she comes from.
Right. And listen, I love it down there. If I have to hide, don't listen to anybody. If I have to hide, maybe I'll hide there. All right. Before I let you all go, you can find me on Twitter, TikTok, and Says Us at Reed Galen, on Twitter, on Instagram and Threads at Reed_Galen USA. As always, guys, you can also find me on Substack at the Homefront. I hope you will like, subscribe. Also, consider becoming a paid subscriber. Tara Palmeri, thanks for joining me. I hope you'll come back.
Of course. Thank you, Reed. This was great.
And everybody else, we'll see you next time.